Lando Norris came so close to scoring a brilliant first Formula 1 win in the Russian Grand Prix before losing the lead in heartbreaking fashion with 3 laps to go thanks to a dramatic late downpour. After scoring his maiden pole position in the rain-hit qualifying session, Norris led the majority of the Sochi race and was soaking up pressure from 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages. But when he and McLaren opted not to pit for intermediates during a late race rain shower, they got caught out when the downpour intensified and the race rapidly unravelled, leaving Norris only 7th at the finish. So was this a consequence of Norris's inexperience, or did McLaren's hesitation condemn him to his fate? And how was he even in a position to win to begin with, forcing Hamilton to battle hard from start to finish to take his landmark 100th win in Formula 1? Let us know in the comments what you think about Norris's near miss and whether it was the driver or team that should take the lion's share of the blame. The McLaren Mercedes MCL 35M is a competitive car, but it's not one capable of taking pole position on outright pace in dry conditions. However, the combination of Norris and wet conditions proved at Spa that it could be a threat for pole before crashing, and the rain on Saturday at Sochi created another opportunity. Hamilton was on target for pole position during much of qualifying, including on the first runs in Q3 when he set the pace on intermediates. But Norris had split the Mercedes drivers during this phase of running and then made an earlier switch to slicks on a drying track. When the Mercedes drivers did come in, chaos reigned. Hamilton hit the wall in the pit entry and also delayed Valtteri Bottas while his front wing was changed. But even if that had not happened, Mercedes had been too late calling its drivers in, meaning they were only ever likely to get one flying lap on slicks. But Norris had time for an outlap, then 2 quick laps to build the tyre temperature before taking the checkered flag. Thanks to running a decent level of downforce, he was only 3rd fastest through the first sector, but got stronger as the lap progressed, particularly in the final sector, to take pole position by over half a second from Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz. Norris lost the lead at the start to Sainz, who made the most of the available tows and passed his former teammate around the outside of turn 2. Norris chased Sainz and took the lead on lap 13, but his real opponent wasn't Sainz, it was Hamilton, who was at this stage running 5th and 7.5 seconds behind Norris. Norris made his pit stop to change from mediums to hards on lap 28. This was 2 laps after Hamilton, but while Norris retained the de facto race lead, eventually cycling back to first place on lap 37 after Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso stopped, the Mercedes driver was closing in. On lap 38, Hamilton closed to within 2 seconds for the first time, but Norris's precision in the final sector ensured Hamilton was never close enough on the run to turn 2 to mount a challenge. With the laps counting down, it seemed as if Norris had his first victory in the bag, but the rain had just started to fall on parts of the track. This video is sponsored by F1 Authentics, the home for official F1 memorabilia. You can get the ultimate F1 memorabilia from sports memorabilia specialists, including artwork, signed photos and authentic mini helmets. We're running a competition with F1 Authentics now that closes at 9 PM on Tuesday 28th September 2021. Head to We Are The Race on Instagram to see how you could win one of these incredible prizes. Your name printed on a square of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix checkered flag, or a Fernando Alonso 2021 1:2 scale helmet, or a Michael Schumacher 300th Grand Prix 1:2 scale helmet. Visit f1authentics.com to find out more about what they do. Norris and McLaren's winning position turned to dust in the final 7 laps, thanks to their failure to pit for intermediates either before or at the same time as Hamilton, who came in at the end of lap 49. McLaren's priority in the analysis of that decision that it is currently working through will focus on whether it could and should have overruled Norris's preference to stay out and called him in. Hamilton pitted 2 laps earlier than Norris for intermediates and went on to win. Norris barely made it back to the pits when the track was at its wettest and he was still on slicks. He eventually finished 7th after pitting later than everyone except Charles Leclerc, who himself plummeted from 5th to 15th. Several drivers with less to lose, notably Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz and Valtteri Bottas, had indicated their preference for an early switch to intermediates and benefited from being in the first 2 groups to stop on laps 47 and 48. Norris's race engineer Will Joseph told him with 5 laps left that some cars are pitting for inters, Bottas has gone already. But the track conditions at this time were still manageable on slicks, so Norris was not interested in changing. Joseph's next message, a warning that Norris was approaching a particularly slippery part of the track where several cars were going off, is what drew the harsh, "Yeah, shut up" response from Norris, broadcast on the world feed as he tried to concentrate. Half a lap later, Joseph asked what Norris thought about intermediates, and Norris replied no. Save for an unanswered question from Joseph about whether Norris felt he could continue on slicks, this was the final exchange before Hamilton and Mercedes pulled the trigger on changing tyres themselves on lap 49. This meant McLaren never told Norris it felt intermediates were necessary and did not give him weather forecast information, let alone give him an explicit command to box. The crucial factor that Norris could not have been aware of, and that McLaren should have been, given it had access to the same Météo France weather services all of the teams do, was that after the first bank of rain there was another, more intense one just seconds behind it. While Norris had lost time to the intermediate runners in the previous laps, it was on lap 51 that he shipped huge amounts of time. His painfully slow in-lap, during which he spun in impossible conditions, was an astonishing 74 seconds slower than Hamilton's 2 laps earlier. Norris said after the race he did not feel he had gambled because it seemed obvious to him that the slicks were okay, but he, of course, could not have known about that second bank of rain. McLaren team boss Andreas Seidel admitted that with hindsight it was obvious they made the wrong call, so the focus of its review is whether McLaren had the necessary information to overrule Norris and where the breakdown was in the decision-making process. When told Hamilton had changed tyres, Norris said he'd seen and told Joseph, "We've just got to commit to staying." That's because Norris was now completely reliant on the slick tyre call being the right one in order to win the race, although McLaren could still have intervened at this point and ordered him to pit at the end of the next lap, a move that at least would have guaranteed second place. They didn't, with Joseph instead telling Norris he had to stay out on track, with eyes solely on the victory, towards the end of the lap after Hamilton pitted. This was the final lap on which slicks were remotely viable before the rain worsened and Norris's race was ruined. So while Norris could have called for intermediates, as others such as Verstappen and Raikkonen did, it was McLaren that had all the information available. When Hamilton was reluctant to come in and indeed overruled the initial call to pit from race engineer Pete Bono Bonington on lap 48, Mercedes insisted, because it saw what Hamilton couldn't have known, that there was a second bank of rain. Hamilton had already missed 4 opportunities to take his landmark 100th F1 win, and when his qualifying problems, which culminated in spinning and lightly backing into the wall at turn 16 on his 1 push lap on slicks in Q3, left him 4th on the grid, it was clear he was up against it again. The dynamics of the race were determined not only by the unusual grid, but also by the way things panned out into turn 2 at the start of the race. Hamilton was boxed in at turn 2, dropping behind Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso and, later in the lap, Daniel Ricciardo, who he had battled with through the early corners to run 7th. He repassed Alonso easily enough on the second lap, but was stuck behind Ricciardo until the McLaren driver stopped at the end of lap 22. Hamilton had been told to do the opposite of Ricciardo, so stayed out and put in 4 quick laps in clear air to use up the remaining tyre life before pitting. After the pit stops shook out, Hamilton's target was Norris and a 100th victory. Norris rejoined 8 seconds ahead of Hamilton, but with Hamilton unleashed in a quicker car and with Norris having to save fuel to bring himself back on schedule, Norris opted to look after his tyres too. This was crucial in ensuring that he had the grip later in the race to keep Hamilton at arm's length. The gap came steadily down as the laps ticked away. Before the rain came, Hamilton had got to within 1.1 seconds of Norris, but struggled to get any closer thanks to the understeer he picked up in the McLaren's wake. With Mercedes spotting the aforementioned second bank of rain, Hamilton was called in, initially on lap 48, which he disregarded because the track was drying, then again on lap 49. Hamilton then took the lead when Norris spun at turn 5 on lap 51, leading the final 2.5 laps to bag that 100th win and take the World Championship lead, albeit by only 2 points, given Verstappen jumped from 7th to 2nd thanks to his well-timed stop for intermediates. Let us know in the comments what you made of McLaren's decision-making process and Hamilton's 100th victory. And if you enjoyed this look at the amazing Russian Grand Prix, make sure you like and subscribe.